So what we will do now is kind of something new and kind of something old, meaning it is coming to the end, going back to the beginning, wrapping up if you want, and preparing you for the exams. What you make out of it is your thing, both in terms of the exams and in terms of understanding and thinking about economics. I can only try to help you. Trying to help you is what I said as well on Blackboard. I'm going now through the exams. There are two ways of doing it. The one is fast and easy for me, and more or less useless for you. I just read them, fast reading, write a number, and that's it. And the other way is reading it in a different way, making notes, giving you some feedback individually. Sometimes I made remarks in the text, and sometimes I wrote at least briefly something. It depends on your submission of what you submitted, and it depends as well on how I can make comments that are somewhat useless. This takes more time, which means my original plan doesn't really work out. I think I wanted to have it ready by a certain date. If I do it this way, I hardly can go with it. You'll get this feedback. You'll get as well the feedback in writing, meaning I will send it to you. I don't know how to do this yet technically. At the end of the day, you still get marks, just one figure, for passing, for not passing. Some people still didn't submit. I don't know why. I sent to all where there had been a problem with the first submission. I sent you an email making you aware of it. If you don't check your emails, it's not my problem. I will make some general remarks next time or the time after. What you should observe, what went good, what went not so good, where there are problems. I make them individually, I make them collectively if you want. There are some general problems. And there are some, well, I shouldn't say some general problems. There are some general issues, basically showing up in more or less all submissions. There are some individual issues. You always can come, not always, you can come to my office and we can talk about it, through it. Some actually I would like to invite up to now only positive cases, because I thought you did a remarkably good job, and I should make you aware of where you can go further. There may be others where I just want to see you to make you aware of there are serious problems. So, as I said, this takes more time than I hoped it would be the case. At the same time, I think it's the best for you to get something out of it when it comes to the overall learning process. Exams, you know the time of the exam now. It had been told, I had been told, I don't know, 2 days ago or something, 3 days ago. I think it's the 19th week. It's the Tuesday, I don't know. I know that you know it already. Preparing it for yourself, all these tests that had been made and that will be made are relevant to prepare you. You did the test, hopefully. The results, the correct answers, are on the blackboard. After the submission date, I put them on the blackboard. Go back, look at the questions again, look at the correct answer, look at what you answered. It's there for you to learn, to look, to correct yourself. This is kind of essential. As I said, I cannot do this for you. I can go through some issues that are hugely relevant from what we did throughout the semester. And the aim of the game, this exercise, is about making you aware of things, how they go together now. You will hopefully understand more about these individual issues when looking at them in context. I said it briefly today as well, but more extensively earlier, that when we are talking about economics, we are not talking about economic processes, but we are talking about economics as science. And there is a certain issue around it. I mentioned as well the book, I provided this by Yanis Varoufakis, Foundations of Economics, I think. I think it's well written, and it puts things into context. And it starts actually with this question, why is economics an academic discipline? Why is it a science? It is a question somewhat that not everybody would agree. And actually many economists say as well, if it's a science, may be questioned. We don't have these hard facts as we find them in physics. And of course you find the argument more the other way around. If you talk to people from chemistry, from physics, they say economics as a science, scientific discipline, forget it. Of course it is important, but show me the law of gravity in economics. In physics we know this falls. And this is not a matter of belief that it falls, but we know why it falls. We can measure that it falls. And there you have some parallels that of course I can predict. I won't do it with this thing, I don't know if it works. But with this, I know it falls under the condition that I don't hold it anymore. In economics, I cannot predict if the growth rate next year will be 6.5%. This is currently the figure they say. Here for China, 6.5%. I cannot predict this in the strict sense. It may be 6.4%. It may be 6.7%. It may go completely wrong, and it may be 3%, or it may be 9%. If it's 9%, it goes completely wrong because the prediction is 6.5%. Even if you are better than expected, it's wrong. The prediction is wrong. But you have, as well in economics, this understanding of we do this, we have economics, and on the basis of economics, we are able to predict something. We don't sit down and pray and hope and guess, it will be increasing, decreasing, stable. We have our methodologies and methods allowing us to say this is going to happen. And of course you can be very precise and calculate the speed even of this key falling. And you can be completely wrong because there is a strong wind and the key doesn't fall down. It doesn't fall down with the predicted speed. It actually is detoured and goes to the side. It goes somewhat down, but not a straight line. And we learn more and more. We learn that it's not going straight down anyway, because due to the turn of the globe, the planet, due to different influences, it is relative. There are different influences. But we can measure it. We can measure the speed of the key falling depending on the weight of the key. And this is what we can do in economics as well. We can predict things, defining it as a science, whatever the precision of the prediction is, and we can measure it. And we can measure it under the same conditions as we measure in physics, as we have definitions in chemistry and or biology. We have the weight. And it is amazing if you go back in history. Every little village had its own weight. Today we have a global weight, a globally accepted weight, 1 kg equals 1 kg. This is something we measure. There is one unified measurement of weight. Distance. We measure distance in kilometers. But some people still calculate in miles. It's a different story. We have this general measurement, and even when it comes to miles, we have the general agreement on this is 1 mile. 1 land mile, 1 sea mile, and then that. So predictability, measurability, defining or being defined by a certain consensus. We can consent on something else. We can have a different definition. We can say this is a mile, but we agreed upon something different. So there is this standard by definition, by a consensus, And this consensus is about exactly defining the criteria under which something is considered to be this and that. GDP. GDP is not about wealth. GDP is about economic activities. And you know the definition, what goes into it. Nothing more and nothing less. It is not about wealth. It's simply about economic activities. That there is a connection, a possible connection, a specific definition, connection between economic growth of GDP and wealth is another question. We are not talking about this. And there are disputes about it. Some people say GDP equals wealth. Some people simply say it's nonsense. It's complete nonsense. And some people say, yeah, there is a connection, but we have to look exactly at the conditions. So you have different opinions on this, but you have the general agreement. There is a consensus, a definition of what GDP is, and if we look at GDP, we are looking at GDP as economic activity and not at your voluntary work. Doesn't count. Sorry about this. We don't say it's useless, but we say it's not part of economic activities. We define the conditions. And under these conditions, we say it is relevant as economic activity. What is a fish? An animal moving in the water and not on the water. So a dolphin is a fish. No. A dolphin moves like a fish, but it breathes in a different way. That's why they always come up and get some air. A fish gets it out of the water. A dolphin gets it out of the air. So we have to be careful what exactly the definition is. This is what you find in many cases. A fish swims, moves under the water. This is not a fish. A bird can fly. Did you ever see a penguin? Did you ever see penguins fly? No. There are birds, but they cannot fly. Hens is more or less the same. You can fly a little bit. And all this is about rationality. We have not criteria of belief, of faith, but it is about rational criteria that kind of allow us these predictions, that allow us the definitions, or that are part of the definitions. And I was surprised when I prepared one of the lectures to see that actually the subjective temperature, felt temperature, is as well at this stage defined in a rational way. It's not about how I feel about it. I think it's cold, I think it's warm, I think it's just right. This is not relevant. Even subjective temperature is now defined in this rational way. We can measure it. We have things how we can say this is warm, subjective warm. It is about rational things. It's not about choosing a personal choice. Of course, this is relevant, how you feel about it. But at this stage, we talk about subjective temperature, felt temperature, as a matter of norm. Defined, measurable, consent agreed upon. Objective in terms of that we can measure this, simply putting a figure onto this. But we always have to be aware of the fact that these figures are only an instrument to help us, a methodological instrument to work with it. We cannot work with different feelings. That's for psychology relevant. But in economics, we cannot do this. We have to put a figure on it. So employment is not the work you do. Employment is not what you like to do. Employment is if you are employed and if you are working under certain conditions, meaning having a contract. Having a contract not with a minimum wage or minimum income, but at least being over a certain threshold. Objectivity. Why you do it? Incentives are not relevant here. They are relevant for economic processes. In economics, we are looking at incentives, but they are not part of the methodology. And we can compare this. Comparison is another important issue when it comes to defining economics as science. Is this hard? Timber? The plate of the table, is this hard? It is. And one of the criteria to figure out is that you have a certain sound. Actually, it is not really hard. If you compare it with the tiles. The tiles are really much harder, and you can measure it. If you compare it with a table. If you go to the sports ground, the running area is hard underground, firm. If you compare this with the road, it is not. Do your jogging exercise for 1 month on the streets and do it 1 month on that ground. You will see what a difference it is. It's much softer. You don't have the strains on the joints. If you then do it on the grass, it may be very comfortable for some time. It's hard enough. Latest after heavy rain, you will see this is not hard enough. And again, you can actually hear it sometimes. If you try to knock on the tiles, at least it's a very different sound, and it is not the sound that you can cause easily by knocking on the table. Measurable, predictable, objective, and in comparison. One is harder. Defining being hard is as well about defining in comparison. there are many other points playing a role. But what is actually relevant here is the methodology. It's not about how you get the data. That's about methods. It is not about scarcity of how much do you have. It's not about incentives. Why do you do something? Why are you engaging on the market? Why are you looking at growth? It is not about comparative advantage. Of course, in economics, we are looking at comparative advantage. But relevant for us, in terms of being or defining what we are doing as science, is something else. So in a way you can say you have the methodology on the one hand, and you have the content on the other, the substance. Incentives matters, scarcity matters, but not as point of methodology. As matter of methodology, it is about being able to measure it, having a consensus, having a definition that we agree upon, and not believing in something, but having rational criteria. Now all this has to be and can be qualified, as in physics, as in medicine. Rational behavior. One of the main topics in economics. Homo economicus, the rational being, individually deciding, making rational decisions. What is rational? Is it rational to work 16 hours and have a high income? In economic terms, it is. Because we are utility maximizing. At the same time, it is not rational because at some stage, the additional gain we get is a loss of what we can do with the money, what we can do with the utilities, a loss of health, loss of comfort, all this. So what does it mean to say rational behavior, rational individual behavior? Of course we behave as individuals. Rational individual behavior. But then there's as well the question, what does it mean to say I'm behaving as individual? In one way or another, I make assumptions about the behavior of others, about the resources of others, about the wishes of others. I make even assumptions that are relevant in different time frames. I said, if I'm working in a competitive environment, I produce something, I have to define the price. Everybody says 50 for the same product, same quality. I say 49. This is the rationality, short-term rationality, to say, then I get into business. People have an advantage to buy from me instead of to buy from you. They save 1 unit. That's great. In the long term, I undermine my own business. Because I can know, I can predict that the next person will say 49, he is in business. 49, I go with it. So we are in business. Not in mutual business, but we are competing. The other 48 are pushed to the side. What happens is predictable. 2 things. The one is all will follow, and at some stage we have the price of 49, which means I'm not in business or just because I started with 49. Now I would have to go to 48. How long can I maintain this of going down and down and down? The other problem with it is that I have actually the challenge to say, now I look for another way. After having had this advantage of being in business and getting more out of this business than you, I buy your business. So on the one hand, I reduce the prices we all get because you all will follow, or at some stage I'm so firm in business that I can buy your business. Monopolization, centralization, concentration of capital. We talked about it. All this is not about economics, defining economics as science, although it is relevant. Relevant is the methodology when it comes to the definition of science, economics as science. Don't mix things up. Be clear about it. Then you are able as well to see something else, that economics as science is looking at development, looking at history. All our economies had been very different over time. The old economy, ancient economies, had not been considered or are not considered today as dealing with economic questions. It was about good life. It was about managing households. It was about managing resources. There were no institutions as we have them now, where you go to work, where you have your job, where you have an employer. It had been families, large families, different to the families we know today. Productive units. Then you have had feudal systems, where you didn't have the slaves anymore, but you have had the dependent peasants, the landlord owning land, It had been about agriculture. The workers there had not been free. They had bound to the soil, and the soil was owned by the landlord, by the nobilities. Then you have had a decisive shift, a decisive change in the 19th century. When we talk about economics today, and when we talk about the economy today, we are talking about industrial, capitalist, market economies. We have different emphasis there: industrial, capitalist, market. You have had some forms of industriousness before industrial capitalism. You have had some forms of capital before, trade capital, before modern capitalist existed. You have had markets all the time. But this kind of capitalist, industrialist market society is something new that emerged in the 19th century. And what was relevant there? Why do we talk about this new stage of economic development? One of the major reasons there is that the orientation of the entire economic process changed now. And the orientation had been on gain. It was not about managing resources. Actually, it had been wasting resources occasionally if it was good for business, if it was good to gain from it. Many of these, I still didn't manage to watch this film, I have it. There is a film apparently showing the waste, the permanent and systematic waste of these economies. The production that calculates at the beginning that things don't last. A computer, a telephone, a table, furniture is not made to last. And there is this film, actually they made some calculations and investigations there, that things have a kind of built-in mechanism that after a year or 3 years they are waste. I think I told you the story once buying a lawnmower. And I saw one and another, they looked very similar. All self-propelling, all kind of the same. And I asked the guy in the shop, listen, why is this for 300 and this for 500? And he said, I don't know. There is a tiny, tiny difference. Just buy the one for 300. You have to buy after 5 years a new one anyway. They are both going broken. They are both being broken after a certain time. So it's not that you get something lasting longer if you invest more. Sometimes it is the case, but this is not the point. Gain means you invest in something from which you get money, not in sustainable development. And sustainable development or development is another thing that is relevant for economics as science. Its development as matter of growth. Of course, we have growth as well, we have development as well in terms of quality. If you look at stuff today, it is usually, we can say, we use this term of it's much better than we have had before. But this kind of growth we are looking at is not about quality, it's not about sustainability, but actually the other way around. Making more and more and more. Exponential growth. Growth without limits. Something that doesn't work, that is not possible. You remember possibly the little story at the beginning when we talked about the rice corn on the chessboard. It is simply not possible. Even if we think this is only a tiny change, it's a small change, it's a small growth. All these small additional values, the additional production, is coming to a stage, to an amount that actually overturns itself. It's increasing speed, like physics. If something falls, the speed is increasing. We don't necessarily see it. If we grow, if an economy grows, the speed is increasing. And there you have to be careful. It is not increasing necessarily in a visible way. You saw it with Moore's law. For us, a computer is a computer. It can do a little bit more, but not really much more. If you look at the figures, there is growth. There is tremendous growth. And it's getting faster and faster. The change of technology is getting faster and faster. So even if you say, but I only have one computer today. I have had one computer 5 years ago. There's no growth. There is growth. This computer is much, much faster. The capacity of this computer is much, much larger. The productivity, even if you go to agriculture today, is tremendously larger. If you look back, we talked about sectors. The meaning of the agriculture of the primary sector is decreasing in the overall perspective. Less production in the primary sector, more production in the tertiary sector. At the same time, we still produce more in the primary sector than we did many years ago. All this is a matter as well of exponential growth. Exponential growth still reaching an end at some stage, not least this end that many of the goods we produce in the primary sector are now not really products of the primary sector, but they are parts or they are results of another way of production, genetically modified food, for instance. So this is something you should explore again when it comes to looking at connections and when it comes to understanding economics, but as well when preparing the exams. So we'll see next week.